Hello. Welcome to my presentation on the use of sound in Tobe Hooper's film Texas Chainsaw Massacre. My name is Marina Fortier. I'm a horror and film enthusiast, and I'm excited to take a closer look at one of the most effective films I've ever viewed. Before we begin, I want to place a trigger warning for graphic violence and blood. If seeing on-screen death disturbs you, you may choose to skip the film segments. But an alternative I'd like to offer, as the visuals might be disturbing, is to instead listen to the clips without visuals. After all, we're focusing on sound. Also, in future slides, there is at one point a photo of a dead body. This is in discussion of the Vietnam War. So just prepare yourself for that, and I'll try to give a warning before that slide comes up. Okay, let's do it. So, sound design. Sound design is how filmmakers shape our audible experience of a film. But sound also can deepen and improve the spectator's experience of the narrative. As Steven Spielberg says, the eye sees better when the sound is great. Sound is an important element of storytelling and mood. Sound may be music, ambient noise, or even silence. Any audible effects or accompaniment falls under the sound design. Looking at movies comments, for most narrative films, sound provides cues that help us form expectations about meaning. In some cases, sound actually shapes our analyses and interpretations. That's from Chapter 9 of Looking at Movies. The person behind most of the sound effects in Texas Chainsaw is Wayne Bell, who is a well-known person in the horror film sphere as of today. So before we get into sound, I'd like to discuss pre-sound cinema. Sound technology was properly implemented into film in 1927. Films prior had to rely on imagery and visuals to fully express their narrative. Expressionist compositions were common, and cinema had to be creative. Popular silent films used expressive lighting, sets, and framing to illustrate the narrative, while the innovation of sound opened up a world of opportunities for cinema. Early on, it was regarded as a novelty, but we now see that the oral experience of film can be massively effective on audiences and on the narrative. So, why Texas Chainsaw? Well, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was a success at the box office. While critics had mixed opinions, especially due to the graphic content of the film, it was received well by audiences. The film was ranked number 1 by Total Film's 2005 list of the greatest horror movies ever, and has been a monumental feat for the horror genre as a whole. A thoughtful and terrifying film, Texas Chainsaw is an effective entry into the horror genre. The reason why the film is so successful is partially due to its innovative sound design, along with impactful visuals, brutal deaths, and references to art and history. So why Texas Chainsaw Massacre? Well, I think it's a perfect film to analyze for its sound because its aural components are central to understanding the narrative. Oh, here's the Vietnam photos. It's on the left of the screen. Just try to look to the right if that bothers you. So, film context and cultural setting. The 1970s was a time of violence and fear. The Vietnam War ran from 1954 to 1975, and with Texas Chainsaw premiering in 1974, we were placed within the final years of the war. Werlin writes in Horror Movies An Introduction that the word massacre had become inseparably linked with the My Lai massacre in Vietnam, where American soldiers gunned down 300 to 400 unarmed Vietnamese civilians, including women and children, which is an event that was raw in the public consciousness of the time. From U.S. presence overseas to serial killers at home, unnecessary violence was rampant in society. With this, I'd also like to mention media sensationalism while following domestic murderers and cultists. It seemed everyone and their mother was obsessed with the likes of Ted Bundy or Charles Manson. The Manson family itself, as a phenomena, perverts the safety and stability that we expect from the family unit. A perversion that you see similarly in Hitchcock's Psycho. Humanity was seemingly experimenting with its perverse curiosities, probably in order to relieve some socio-political anxieties. The father figure of the creepy family even states, "I take no joy in killing, but you gotta do what you gotta do." Reminiscent of attitudes of American soldiers sent to Vietnam. Here's our first video clip. The two clips are basically related, but I couldn't find one solid chunk of that. But the breaking them up also does help for our conversation. So first we're going to focus on animal noises and audio effects in this clip. Remember to listen closely. And there, I don't know why it starts editing like that, but anyways, that's the clip we're gonna start with. Now I hope you noticed the pig squealing as Kirk is pummeled with a sledgehammer. Earlier in the film, the group discusses the slaughterhouse that Franklin and Sally's uncle used to work for. Franklin mentions how they used to bash pigs and cattle over the head with a sledgehammer, and sometimes they'd have to hit them a few times before they actually died. So there you can see the parallel Hooper is drawing between the group of kids and the cattle in a slaughter. So the group drives by the abandoned slaughterhouse and has the conversations mentioned. The group looks like hippies with their denim, shaggy haircuts, and floral designs. Progressivists, the group is composed of young people who seek to reduce harm and find peace. Franklin, continuing, says how the industry switched out the sledgehammer method for a railgun, which makes one lethal kill, rather than repeated bashing. More ethical, he says. But Pam disagrees, still viewing the meat system as immoral and cruel. The dialogue at this moment in the film is revisited in the clip. And the conversation is sparked again through the audible effects that we see here, strengthening the narrative and establishing cohesion of images. Next, we're going to talk about misplaced imagery that we see in the film. On the right, you can see from the previous clip a screen cap that we will discuss. And on the left, we're going to watch the beginning of that scene and what leads to it. Once again, listen for sound, lack of sound, and let's get into it. Excuse the few moments at the beginning, but it'll begin momentarily. Okay, that's enough for now. So here we see misplaced imagery. What really blew my mind watching the film for the first time was I didn't even notice the animal noises over some of the deaths, like that beginning scene we watched. But revisiting the film years later, I could not ignore the sound work. The narrative clicked in my mind when I realized the weight of these additions and their placement. Besides aligning the hipsters with victimized cattle, the unexpected imagery can feel disorienting and chaotic, making the film more anxiety-inducing. The animal squeals also equate the killer, Leatherface, and his family to the butchers and the slaughterhouse workers. On the right, you can see the door that Leatherface shuts at the end of that before clip. This is a surrealist element. The house is all wooden. It's a rural farmhouse. So it's kind of odd to have a metal industrial door slam shut at the end. It's anxiety provoking because of how it doesn't belong there. And it gives you a feeling that these people have so much power over the situation, and it's like fantastical almost. So I'd like to mention the ambient sound and silences that we heard. As I mentioned before, the small sounds are sometimes just as effective as the deafening roar of the chainsaw or screaming. The dirt crunching and the wind noises as we walked along with Pam and Kirk provide a feeling of realness. You almost feel like you're there, in danger along with them. At choice moments, there's silence, and the point of view changes. This audible change enforces the idea of an outsider or a predator watching in on them, an external viewer, which is probably the family as they plot their demise. And I think for me, the most effective scare is when Pam falls into that pile of dusty feathers. I can smell the soiled and stained white feathers and feel the crunch of frail bird bones and a dried bird crap under my palms. The chicken squawking is anxiety-inducing and indicates to Pam that she is in danger. Before this, the walk Pam makes to the door from the swing set is eerily silent, only hearing small movements of wind or chain clinking, a calm before the storm. Time and space. Werlin's text mentions the persistence of memory and its role in Texas Chainsaw as inspiring thematic and visual elements of the film, and especially for that sequence we watched. The painting, one of Dolly's best-known works, Werlin writes, depicts 4 pocket watches in a stark mental landscape, with a bare tree sprouting from a tabletop and lonely seaside cliffs in the distance. 3 of the watches are drooping, suggesting melting and inevitability, in Freudian terms, impotence. A wilted timepiece also overlays a phallic organic shape that might be a dead animal, but it's actually a stylized profile of the artist. Most famously, in the midground, a pocket watch gone limp drapes over the limb of a dead tree, picturing the end of time. Hooper alludes to Dolly's painting when Kirk and Pam pass a ripped blue tent, pitched beside a bare tree hung with metal household objects. Rusty pans, cups, and coffee pots gently clinking in the breeze. The obliterated campsite also vaguely recalls the Western, yet Hooper closely references Dolly's witty rendering of unconscious memory, with an inserted close-up of a pocket watch run through by a long nail, also hanging from a branch. That's from Rick Warland's The Horror Film and Introduction, a very helpful and interesting book. So by referencing this, the film is somewhat equating sex with danger or punishment. Pam and Kirk head to the water hole to go swimming, wink wink, and that is where they meet their end. The final 2 of the group are Franklin and his sister Sally. Being related, they have no sexual tension between them, or as I would hope so. And disturbingly, later during the iconic dinner table scene, Sally offers any kind of sexual act so simply to live, and so that they would let her go. But they don't want to. They want violence, and they value her more as meat on a plate. I bring this up because when I first saw the film, I didn't even notice the hanging pots and pans and watches, but I heard them. The haunting, empty ring of rusted tin. These sound cues made important moments of subtext easier to consume and consider as a viewer. In regards of time and cinematic time, the film occurs over a day and night cycle, with the climax happening at night and in the dark, But the ending, Sally lives and escapes at dawn, which leaves an oddly beautiful shot of Leatherface wailing and ripping his chainsaw before the orange horizon as she drives off. Technology and fear. So in rural America, specifically Texas, which is an icon of the West, industrialization was a common threat and anxiety for workers. People lost jobs due to new technology. The cannibal family in the film turns to murdering and butchering travelers for food, as they all worked in the slaughterhouse before, and after it closed, they're seeking to fill the niche that they have identified with for generations. For the family, technology is a weapon of destruction, and so it is their weapon of choice against the victims, as icons of progressivism. For the group, technology improves quality of life, and is a symbol of freedom. We can see this as Franklin is bound to a wheelchair, but that gives him access to movement and agency. And when Sally finally escapes in the end, she's saved by a truck driving by. Another image of mechanization and vehicles. Continuing on, the chainsaw and industrialization. Werlin comments on this in his book. He writes, "The star of the show, the chainsaw itself, connotes the urban-agrarian conflict as a tool commonly used by the rural working class for small chores, as well as one that can be employed for destruction on a mass industrial scale in lodging or the slaughterhouse industry to cut up carcasses. The weapon of choice even ends up hurting Leatherface, coming back around and sinking in his leg. The chainsaw is an iconic sound indicating a weapon that can cut you into pieces in minutes. I know I'm not alone in feeling a sense of paranoia whenever I hear the chainsaw rip at corn mazes or Halloween events. A symbol of rebellion and rejection, and of mechanization, it straddles the line as an image of the working class and technology. Slide 14. So we have women's screams and feminism. Pam, which we see in our clip, stumbles into the grimy den full of chicken feathers, equating her with an animal that's exploited for its reproductive purposes. In this scene, we also see, scenes with Sally, equated with chickens, and chickens in front of her, in the back of her, audio over her. Contrary to some critics, I actually find that Texas Chainsaw is somewhat a more woman-friendly film than the myriad of other exploitation films of the time. While violence against women is featured, the other characters who are male also receive terrifying conclusions. We even get to see Kirk spaz out and seize on the ground, which is pretty graphic and horrifyingly realistic. I think that just because a film features violence against women does not mean that it is necessarily glorifying that violence. And in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Sally escapes and overcomes the band of men trying to kill and consume her. A hopeful conclusion I didn't see coming. The grittiness and degeneracy of the film was depressing and dark, but the end, good overcomes and she escapes. But how does sound come into play here? Well, I think the women are more audible in their torture than the male deaths. Pam screams uncontrollably as she's hung from a meat hook. Sally's hysterical laughter as she drives off in the end is burned into my psyche. These moments are important and memorable and amplified by the audio present. Just the sound of women overcoming with the Sally there. I'm gonna move on though, for sake of time. Next, we're going to discuss film language and editing. The film language of Hooper's Texas Chainsaw Massacre is cemented in its auditory effects. The editing used to insert choice sound is extremely effective and central to achieving a feeling of horror and abject fear. Editing, lighting, mise-en-scene, and design all work together to create anxiety and a feeling of gritty instability in the film that makes it so iconic. So lastly, I just want to tie it all together. Why is this so important? Why am I talking about sound so deeply? So as we have outlined, the film would achieve only a fraction of its emotional success without the concept and application of sound. Sound is central to understanding the full scope of the narrative, allowing for audience to feel more fear, as well as a more thorough consumption of the elements being presented to them. The messages and connections are made clearer through this use of sound. A cohesion in story and images are presented through this. The narrative takes on a whole nother light when you think about the sounds that are employed and edited in. So making sound a vital concept and function of film. While films can be successful without sound or with limited sound, movies like Texas Chainsaw utilize the component of sound to the maximum, and it makes it highly effective. I hope you enjoyed. Here's my works cited, and I recommend you go out and see the film if it tickles your fancy. Horror history, great movie. Thank you.